Hey guys, it's Mrs. Fox with part one of your Unit 7.3, Rebuilding the Union, the Reconstruction Era. We've gotten through the Civil War, and so now what? It's not like everyone's in love with each other singing Kumbaya the second that the war ends, right? So what happens next? That's what Reconstruction's all about. Very famous time period following the Civil War. Okay, so this is part one. Make sure you have your title down and everything that you need for the beginning of your notes. If you need more time, make sure you push pause at any time during this video clip. Don't forget, I might not always mention left-hand side questions, but you always want to get those down. They should not be something you can answer with a yes or a no, or something you could answer with just a couple words. Left-hand side questions should take a minimum of a sentence and hopefully more to properly answer. Okay, so don't forget those as we go along. If you need more time right now, push pause because here we go. All right, Reconstruction begins. Okay, so what is Reconstruction? Well, Reconstruction is literally the process of reconstructing our nation. Okay, because remember, for a few years now during the Civil War, those 4 years, we have been divided into two parts. And so Reconstruction is all about the federal government's process for bringing back those now ex-Confederate states that are part of the Union again, right? Okay, bringing them back into the United States of America. This is a process, guys, because they have all rejected the U.S. for the last 4 years, right? They had created their own government. They had elected a president. They all had new state constitutions. They had their own money, okay? Their own military, right, with the Confederate Army. And so there is a legal process that needs to happen to bring these people back into the United States of America officially. And that time period, that process by the federal government is known as Reconstruction. Okay, so how long does it last? It lasts from the end of the war in 1865 for a little over 10 years, about 1877, at the Compromise of 1877, which we'll get to later. You have the end of Reconstruction. So what is it that is happening in the South while this process of getting the states to come back into the country is going on? Okay, you guys need to understand that in today's dollars, okay, slavery was a $30 billion a year industry. I mean, it was huge business. And now slavery is gone. So how the heck are they going to build a new society that is not based on slavery? They just lost all their labor overnight. Okay, so now what? Not to mention they have huge portions of land that have just been devastated by the Civil War. Remember, almost all of the fighting occurred in the South. And so you have farms just decimated, burnt down. Remember Total War by Sherman going across the land and just creating havoc and devastation, right? So there's lots of destroyed land. A lot of Confederate soldiers, men of a certain age group, especially in their teens, later teens, early adulthood and 20s and into their 30s, are dead. Okay, or they're returning with injuries, or they're returning to a farm that doesn't exist anymore because it's been burnt down. And so now what do, right? They've lost a lot of their resources because things got burnt down and destroyed in the war. And a lot of people, the last 4 years, they had given up U.S. money, right? They don't have United States money anymore. They've been living in the Confederacy, so they had Confederate money. And now overnight, guess what? The Confederate money isn't good anymore. So even if you were a pretty wealthy person with Confederate paper money, well, now you're broke because it's not worth anything. Okay, not to mention, just because the war is over doesn't mean all Southerners openly arm, embrace all their slaves and say, I'm so sorry for how I treated you, and moving forward, we're going to be best friends. Yeah. It doesn't happen that way, right? There's still a lot of racism. There's a lot of resentment. There are people who don't want to return to the Union, okay? Of course, not everyone feels that way. There are Southerners that are more than happy to become American. There are Southerners that are not racist. There are Southerners that do want to treat African Americans with equality, but they are not the majority, right? The majority of Southerners resent Northerners, they resent Africans, African Americans, and they're not happy about this Reconstruction process. All right, if you need more time, push pause. Otherwise, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. And here we go. Q2. So Lincoln's dead. Why do we have a slide on Lincoln? What's up with that? Well, guys, presidents plan ahead, or good ones try to at least, right? And so Lincoln, before the war ever ended, already had started planning what to do about Reconstruction. What is this going to look like? How are we going to go about doing this when we win? Because he was confident that they were going to win, okay? Especially as we got towards the end of the war and it was becoming more and more apparent during the second half we would, in fact, the North would win. All right, so Lincoln wants to get everything back to normal, the economy up and running, and push out moving forward together quickly. Okay, he knows the longer it takes, the more money it's going to cost, the more room there is for resentment. Okay, he wants to bind the nation's wounds up, forgive each other, and really show a lot of leniency on the South. You guys have to remember that all these Confederate soldiers and all the Confederate leaders, they were committing treason. That is a punishable by death, okay, crime. So he was in his rights to go around collecting Confederate leadership and putting them to death. And that wasn't his attitude about it. His attitude was, hey, we need to move on. We need to work together. Let's forgive, okay, and move forward. So Lincoln's plan was something that became known for Reconstruction as the 10% plan. All right, and the 10% plan was, hey, if you're a Southern Confederate state that is going to make their way into coming back to be a part of the United States of America, you can come back in if you can get 10% of the voting population in that state to swear a loyalty oath to the Union, okay, and agree that they really were going to end slavery. Because you guys remember, just because it says on a piece of paper that we're not supposed to have slavery anymore, according to the 13th Amendment, doesn't mean every little nook and cranny of backwoods Southern communities are following that rule. There were still people very much so trying to hold on to their slaves and not let them find out the news and keep things, you know, par for the course, right? So Lincoln says, hey, 10% swear a loyalty oath, just 10%. That's really not asking a whole heck of a lot. And hey, you're going to put an end to slavery. This plan actually starts going into effect as the Union occupies chunks of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So this was kind of a plan partly in action before Lincoln ends up dying. Okay. Moderate Republicans, because remember Lincoln is a Republican, agree with his attitude of forgiveness. This is still terminology you guys will hear today in today's politics. Yes, you've got two major political parties then and now. You have the Republicans and you have the Democrats. But within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party, it's not like they're all exactly the same. Okay, you have kind of extremists in both parties that are super ultra, you know, all about the extreme, you know, beliefs of that political group, down into moderate that's kind of almost more in the middle and, you know, more easily willing to compromise with Democrats and stuff. Okay, so the moderate Republicans, a little bit more willing to compromise, agreed with Lincoln's attitude of forgiveness. Okay, radical Republicans that don't want anything to do with anything from the Democratic Party, they're all about super, super conservative, definitely all Republican way. They don't like Lincoln's 10% plan. And they actually create a bill that is called the Wade-Davis bill in 1864 that they try to get passed that was much stricter than Lincoln's plan. For example, Lincoln only wanted 10% loyalty oath from the people of each state. In the Wade-Davis bill, they were proposing, no, we want at least 50% of people swearing loyalty. And it had much harsher treatment for Confederate soldiers and Confederate leaders in office and things like that in the South than Lincoln's 10% plan did. However, the Wade-Davis bill never goes through because Lincoln vetoes it. It was against what he wanted. He wanted his 10% plan. He vetoes it, and Congress can't come together to override that veto, so it never actually becomes a law. Okay, if you need more time, make sure you push pause. Okay, otherwise, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. And here we go. So keep that in mind, guys. Moderates and radicals are going to play a role in this lecture and into high school and into college and into life as an American if you end up getting into politics at all. Okay, both parties have moderates and radicals. Okay. All right, so keep that in mind. Draw your line. Of course, we've got video clips for you throughout this presentation. You know I don't show them to you in flipped classroom, but you have access to them. Watch them, watch them, watch them. They are so incredibly helpful, guys. You want to make sure that you get this stuff. This is life-changing things that still affect us today. All right, so let's take a look at Freedmen's Bureau. All right, so Q3, Freedmen's Bureau, write it down, highlighted yellow on the right-hand side of your paper. All right, so what's the Freedmen's Bureau? Well, you know, I was like way older than I should have been when it finally dawned on me, Freedmen's Bureau, free men. Oh, yeah, I got it. Okay, so it's called the Freedmen's Bureau because it was helping free men and women and children, okay? But of course, we make everything male. So the Freedmen's Bureau. All right, so it's a federally government funded program started at the end of the war. It lasts several years, okay? And they had a number of things that they did to help the African American community as they are settling into this newfound freedom at the end of the Civil War and beyond. Okay, so the Freedmen's Bureau is a big federal program that takes place during the Reconstruction era. Okay, what are some of the things that they do? Well, remember, it used to be illegal to teach a slave to read or write. They did not have an education. Very, very few African Americans were educated. There were some that snuck in some education, right? Their masters were nice and taught them, or somehow or another they had learned to read and write, but most did not. So one of the first things that the Freedmen's Bureau does, and a third of their budget actually goes to this, was setting up schools to educate former slaves. People from the North moved down to work as teachers, as well as Southern people volunteering to help teach. Teachers included white people and Black people coming together to educate former slaves of all ages. You didn't have to be a kid. Adults were welcome as well. They set up hospitals for African Americans. They helped reunite families. Remember, for years, you could just be sold at the drop of a hat. You could be married and have kids, and your owner dies, and they separate you all out, and you hadn't seen your wife or husband, or you hadn't seen your kids, or you hadn't seen your parents, or you hadn't seen your cousins, maybe your whole life or for a number of years. And so they started keeping records and trying to unite different, portions of your family back together. Now that it was legal for you, it was okay for you as a freed African American to travel and to go to other parts of the country, right? You would never been allowed to do that before. So now you can go track down your family members that you maybe had not seen in years and years. They also, you're free. Okay, you're free and you have zero money and no place to live in a lot of cases. So you need a lot of things that had been provided to you by your old masters, right? You needed clothing, you needed food, you needed various supplies that you just need to get by, right? You needed shelter. And so the Freedmen's Bureau would also help get freed African Americans on their feet, right? Give them some supplies and find them shelter and things like that. They also provided legal services in case there was ever a conflict or contracts that needed to be signed or, a lawsuit or anything like that. So the Freedmen's Bureau did a lot of things for a number of years during Reconstruction to help newly freed African Americans. Now, of course, the North cheers and applauds at the Freedmen's Bureau. A lot of people working in the Freedmen's Bureau are Northerners, right? Of course, overwhelmingly, a lot of the South does not like the Freedmen's Bureau. Does that mean everyone? Of course not. Of course, there's Southerners that are on board and they're glad African Americans have their freedom and they're okay with the Freedmen's Bureau. But that is not the majority of the population. A lot of the population in the South is not happy about this. They don't want to look at Blacks as equal, something for generations they've never done, right? They want to be able to look down on them and not treat them as equal. So they want to maintain their supremacy and don't like the Freedmen's Bureau. All right, we'll continue this conversation in part 2. So when you're ready, come join me for part 2. Until then, make good choices.